All right. It's pretty quiet out here right now. You can probably hear it. And that's kind of on purpose. We're in the morning here. It's before the day's really started. And it's my favorite time to be outside in the garden. And I want to talk to you from right here while it's still soft like this. Because more than any tip or trick, not so much for being quiet, I actually love, I've been wanting to tell you about this for a while. So let me start with mornings because they're the heart of it for me. Almost every day I come out here with a cup of coffee and I just walk the garden. That's it. I'm not really working. I'm not fixing anything. I'm just looking, seeing what changed overnight, what seedling finally came up, what's flowering, what needs a closer eye in a day or two. Maybe it takes 10 minutes, and it's the most grounding 10 minutes of my whole day. Before anything else can get its hands on me. Before the noise starts, before too many planes fly overhead, you get this quiet stretch just being with these growing things. I don't know how I'd start a day without it anymore. It sets me right. But the thing that I love most, the thing that took me years of gardening to really understand, is the cycle. The whole cycle of it, the circle of it, because that's what a garden really is when you step back far enough. It's a wheel that never stops turning. You put a tiny seed in the ground, it becomes a seedling, then a strong plant, and then it gives you a harvest. And then at the end, the same plant fades and dies back, and you turn it into the soil, and it becomes food for the next thing that you plant. Nothing is ever wasted. Nothing's ever really lost. It just changes shape and feeds what comes next. The tomato that finishes this year, it quite literally helps grow the tomato of next year. And once you truly see that, once it sinks in, it changes how you look at, well, a lot of things. There's such a deep comfort in it, in that circle for me. In a world that so often feels like it's just lurching from one thing to the next with no rhyme to it, the garden keeps its ancient, patient rhythm. Spring, summer, harvest, rest. Around and around. It's been turning that same way for longer than any of us have been here. It'll keep turning long after. Being a small part of that, keeping my little corner of that wheel turning with my own hands, I find that to be genuinely steadying. It reminds me of that I'm part of something much bigger and much older than my own little worries. And then there's the food. I can't talk about why I love this without talking about the food because that's the oldest reason of all. There's nothing quite like walking out to your garden, picking something that you grew from a seed, carrying it 15 steps to your own kitchen, and putting it on the table for the people you love. Nothing. We've gotten so far from that, most of us. Food shows up in plastic from a shelf that that ever we've forgotten it ever came from the dirt and sunlight and somebody's care. But when you grow it yourself and you feed people with it, you reconnect with something that human beings have done for thousands and thousands of years. And that's not a small thing to me. That might be the whole thing to me, really. I love handing a neighbor a bag of tomatoes that they didn't expect. I love I love a kid trying to be bean straight off a plant and being amazed that it's sweet. I love a full table, late summer half of what's on it I grew. That richness that you can't buy that anywhere. It feels like the most honest kind of wealth that there is. I still remember the first time, one of my kids, who's much older now, called me from their own place to say like they'd finally planted a few tomatoes of their own because they missed the ones off my plants. That got me more excited than I expected. That's the cycle too in its own way. The love of it getting handed down and planted somewhere new. The seasons taught me something too, and I'll be honest, this one took me the longest. Every single year, the garden dies back. Everything you nurtured all summer browns and fades and goes to sleep, and the beds go bare and quiet. And for years, that made me sad. It felt like a loss, like the end of something good. But somewhere along the way, all this time in the dirt, it gently changed my mind about it. Now I see the rest for what it is. It's not the garden dying, it's the garden sleeping, gathering itself, getting ready to do the whole beautiful thing all over again. The ending is built right into the beginning. And there's a real peace in that, honestly, that's spilled over into how I think about endings of all kinds. The garden taught me that rest isn't a failure and that most endings are really just quiet before the next start. None of it would turn, of course, without the life in the soil doing the invisible work down there. That's the engine of this whole cycle. Quietly making it all possible while we take the credit up top. Because I've got a lot of respect for that. But even that, to me, is just part of the bigger circle that I'm talking about. one more thing feeding the next. So when I'm behind the scenes here, thinking about what to share with you, that's really what I'm hoping to pass along. Not just to grow a good tomato, though we'll get to that. What I really want is for you to feel that rhythm for yourself, to have your own quiet morning walk with your coffee, to watch your own little wheel turn, seed the harvest, the soil, and around again. To put something you grew on your table. I think a lot of people are quietly starving for that exact kind of connection and don't even have the words for it. I know I was before I found it out here. That's why I love this. Not the vegetables in the end as much as I love those too. It's the rhythm. It's the cycle. It's the quiet mornings and the full tables and the deep, steadying comfort of being a small part of something that keeps on turning. That's the real harvest. It's the one that I hope you get to bring in too. All right. Now, it is getting brighter now. The day's, really getting going, and I'm going to go finish my coffee and walk the rows one more time. Come join me out here whenever you're ready. There's always room.